From the Buckeye TV studio at The Ohio State University, it's the National Hour, where we cover the hottest topics in sports on and off campus. On this week's episode, after a record-breaking performance against Florida A&M last Saturday, Kenny G is going back to the bench. Huh? With just a few games to go in the MLB regular season, it looks like both Ohio teams are going to the playoffs. And while the Browns management may be ready to throw in the towel for the season, the Browns players have other ideas. Let's talk about it with Darius Thigpen and Jeff Hammersley.
And this is the National Hour. I'm Darius Thigpen.
And I'm Jeffrey Hammersley.
Great to have you folks joining us here on Buckeye TV. And we're going to get to some of the other professional teams in Ohio a bit later. But we're going to, of course, start with the Ohio State Buckeyes. Jeff, 76-0 romping of Florida A&M. Kenny Guyton, record-setting day.
Yeah, 6 touchdowns and romping's an understatement. 76 points, most of those points in the first half. Kenny Guyton, 13 touchdowns on 2 picks this season. Through the few games he's been in for Braxton Miller, he's really looked well. I know it's against Florida A&M, but when you can throw 6 touchdowns against any team, that's impressive either way.
Not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5. You got 6 touchdowns. I mean, that's unthinkable. The fact that you could have that many in a game, obviously the inferior competition, you have to look at that as well, but 6 touchdowns.
Still.
Very, very impressive. How about some of the other guys who had some big days, Ezekiel Elliott being one of them?
Yeah, I mean, second half he comes in, you're thinking, okay, maybe a few carries, some fair amount of yardage, but when you get 14 carries, 162 yards and 2 touchdowns in the second half, I mean, once again, it's like Kenny Guyton. It's amazing you can do that. I know it's against Florida A&M, and the competition isn't like it's not Wisconsin, it's not Penn State or Michigan or anybody. But the fact that you can come in off the bench, 14 carries, 162, and make plays for yourself, that's impressive, especially from a guy like Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah, you also had a couple of guys. Evan Spencer played really well, 50 yards, 2 touchdowns in that game. Bradley Roby had an interception, but the big one that you look at, just as far as team domination.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
76-0. Yeah, that speaks loud, but 603 total yards for Ohio State, and then you have 80 for Florida A&M. FAMU got whooped.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, Florida A&M, if it was, you could use their yardage for points, and they would only have a 4-point margin on Ohio State. It's scary, the fact that we can get 76 points and hold them to 80. In fact, most of the game, the first half, they were in the lower 40s, 50s. I mean, they were just getting shut down. Especially, it's when the secondary guys came in, they still weren't getting that many yards. We saw second half, they tried doing wildcat formation, got nothing. They started just doing crazy plays, got nothing. Running, still stagnant the entire day. I mean, second half, their second string running back comes in, gets a 10-yard rush. That's essentially an eighth of their offense on one play there. But it just shows that it's the competition. There's a great disparity there. But the fact that you can put 600 yards and hold your opponent to 80, it doesn't matter who you do that to, that's still very impressive.
Yeah, take that 76-0 performance with a grain of salt. 1-2 coming into the game. Florida A&M, not exactly a level competition with Ohio State playing in the MEAC. Now, this next game for the Buckeyes is going to be, we'll say it'll be more of a challenge. It's going to be a huge game, Ohio State and Wisconsin, 8 o'clock at the Shoe.
Yeah, it's not Florida A&M this week. This is the real deal Wisconsin team. They put up some very good numbers against Purdue. And it's really looking at what they have here, the whole running situation they have with Melvin Gordon, James White, that duo there, very impressive. But it's got to be a very good showdown because they have an Ohio State team who really hasn't played anybody. This is their first real test. Wisconsin, they played Purdue last week. They blew them out. So Purdue really didn't give Wisconsin any troubles. In Wisconsin, that was like their first Big Ten game. As we knew earlier in the year, Purdue they had Notre Dame on the ropes for vast majority of that game in West Lafayette. But it's this Wisconsin team looking this week. They played a little bit better competition than we played, but the advantage here is the game's in Columbus, not in Camp Randall like it was last year.
Well, before we even really get into the game itself, the biggest story of this weekend is going to be will he or won't he? Yeah. Talking about Braxton Miller, starting quarterback for the Buckeyes. He's missed the last few games. 3 games total if you include the game against San Diego State where he went out with an injury in the first quarter. It was pretty much the first drive. So now, will we see the return of Braxton Miller?
See, that's why I jumped to the Melvin Gordon, James White stuff, because it's like a soap opera of sorts here in Columbus. It's like, okay, Braxton, okay, it can't be that bad. Urban said it wasn't that bad. Misses the rest of San Diego State, misses Cal. Oh, come back Florida A&M, who was practicing a little bit.
But there's no reason to play in that game.
Right, but still, They bring him back here, Wisconsin. It's like, really, he has to shake the rust off against the Wisconsin defense. That's going to be tough. It's not Florida A&M. This is a very good Wisconsin team, and if he goes through the motions in the beginning, that could be enough that could throw us off that game, especially if Wisconsin's offense and Melvin Gordon gets hot. But it's the situation of, okay, if Kenny Guyton, who he's shown himself, we said his numbers earlier, he's got 13 touchdowns, 2 picks. If something happens, you can put him in. But at the same time, Braxton Miller, you walked in, he was the quarterback to begin the year, and he still is our quarterback. But you have the two, it's a whole soap opera of sorts. Both of them are captains. Yeah. I can see either way who you go with. I can see it. But it's just, I don't want to be Urban Meyer making that decision and saying, hey, you're going to play and you're going to sit, and we're going to see how it goes.
You mentioned the fact that they're co-captains.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the year, they were both named captains. So 2 quarterbacks, 2 captains. It's definitely rare to see that at one program. But then on top of that, this week they were named co-starters.
Yeah.
And so the network up in Bristol, they ran with that story. But it's something kind of to be expected at this point. It is a bit mind-blowing, something you don't expect. But what does this really mean? Should Braxton Miller be the starting quarterback of the Ohio State Buckeyes this weekend?
It's a tough one. I say if he is, as Urban said on Monday during his press conference, if he's 90%, I would play him for a little bit and see how he is. And if he struggles a little bit, I would then put Kenny Guyton in. But if he's 100% at opening series, he's lights out. This is the Braxton that we've always known. Keep him in until something happens. But going and looking forward, though, if you don't put Braxton in this week or you play him, limit his series down, what are you going to do next week with Northwestern? Because do you use that same formula, or do you say, Kenny, hey, you're done right here, and we're going to put Braxton for the probably biggest game of the year next to Michigan? But it's this game will dictate what happens next week, in my opinion. If Braxton gets the green light, he's starting this week, you will know he's going in next week with Northwestern as a starter. If Kenny Guyton comes in, it could be one of these things where if Braxton works his way back up and is really, truly 100%, then he may go with Northwestern. But at the same time, Kenny, he's earned that spot at this point because these numbers they're NCAA football video game good. That's how good they are. I know it's against Cal, Buffalo, San Diego State, and Florida A&M, but still 13 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Those are extraordinarily good numbers to have. I don't want to see that talent be on the sideline.
And I guess it begs the question, what more does Kenny Guyton have to do to be the starter?
Well, what does he need to do? I think it's one of these things. The only possible thing I can see is if Braxton struggles, Kenny comes in and it's Purdue all over again where we saw, or what actually would probably happen is if Braxton gets hurt again. Because if he has to get forced out of the pocket, has to scramble and rush, we've seen it with Purdue last year, we've seen it this year at San Diego State, the odds of injury and the durability with them, that's a huge question. But it's one of these things you just got to play it by ear. You can't predict, hey, he's already go down week 9, Kenny Guyton, you're coming in for that game in week 10. It's play it by ear, but the problem is, Kenny, this is really his last shot at showing scouts, I'm Kenny Guyton, draft me. I can play with the big boys in the NFL, but it's really a catch-22 of sorts. It's double-edged.
Well, I mean, we've heard the crazy. We've heard the redshirt Braxton and let Kenny G step in and take over the rest of the season. We've heard the Geisman talks, the Kenny Guyton winning the Heisman talks. But in all seriousness, would it be the craziest thing in the world to see a 2-quarterback system?
I was lobbying for it and going into after the Cal game, like, well, if he's doing this good against Cal, let's see what happens. And we've seen Urban Meyer do this before. You had Chris Leak, Tim Tebow. That's the big thing there, and it worked, and it won a title there. It adds a whole interesting dynamic to this offense. And if I was an opponent to Ohio State, I would be in the film room crying because it's like, okay, we have to prepare for Braxton and Kenny Guyton. It's just not, okay, we know Braxton, he's got to do this, do that. It's, okay, we can shut Braxton down, but if we got to bring in Kenny Guyton, if they bring in Kenny Guyton, how do we stop the read options? Or if they put Braxton in, okay, how do we stop the pass? And we stop the pass, how do we got to stop him from rushing, getting some yardage there? So it would be very interesting. And I honestly, if it was going to happen, I would try to do it this week against Wisconsin because now that, Northwestern, because I keep talking about this because this is a huge game next week, they say that's a program-changing game for them. If Ohio State makes a statement against Wisconsin this week and says, we're going to run this 2-quarterback system, we're doing this read option with Kenny and Braxton, we're going to pass with Kenny and Braxton, they're 2 different quarterbacks, and it's 2 different ways you have to prep for them. And for Northwestern, on that prep work they had, back to the drawing board, and you now got a week to try to understand how to stop the Buckeyes.
Well, okay, let's finally move off of Ohio State and get to their opponents this weekend. A really solid team in the Big Ten, the Wisconsin Badgers, come in with the 3rd-ranked rushing offense, and a lot of it has to do with 2 of their studs at running back, Melvin Gordon, who is leading the NCAA in rushing yards, and then James White, who is no slouch.
Yeah, I mean, look at Melvin Gordon, 53 carries, 624 yards, 2 touchdowns. James White, 61 carries, 442 yards, 3 touchdowns. Both those guys, you give them the rock, they're going to run it to the house, basically. And this is the typical Wisconsin offense we've always seen. Ron the Great Dane was there. They had that. And last year with Monty Ball. This Wisconsin, they've always had a decent running back there to make plays happen, and this year they have 2 here. So it will be very interesting to see how Ohio State stops them, because this season there's not really been a rushing game that has posed any problems. This week you have 2 guys who could be threats, and they're both on the same formation behind the Wisconsin quarterback and Stavi. This could get very interesting to see how we can stop this team.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a great offensive line from Wisconsin. That's also something you expect, but the defense has really been good this year. Granted, a lot of the early games have been shutouts, but they did play really well against Purdue, and although they lost to Arizona State, Wisconsin had their moments in that game. If you ask anybody up in Madison, they'll still say that they won that game.
I mean, I would say they won that game.
I mean, overall, that defense is 10th in the country and just 10 points allowed per game. What do you think Ohio State's going to see from this Wisco defense?
I think this is it's one of these. It's a regular, I believe it's like a 4-3. It's a standard defense, but they can stop the spread offense, as Urban Meyer has said, and I really thought it was going to be a blowout this week, but then you start looking at the numbers, look at what Wisconsin really brings to the table. I almost feel like I was treating Wisconsin like what the people were treating Ohio State 2 years ago when Braxton made that great play to beat Wisconsin last time they were here. If Wisconsin walks in as the underdog here, they get explosive in a couple big plays. I mean, this is going to be a very good game, and I think it's going to come down. Whoever gets, as Urban said, whoever gets the ball last, that's what will happen and who will win this ball game.
All right, really quick, give me a score.
I'm going to go 38-34 Ohio State. Very close one.
I'm going 27-20 Buckeyes. That's going to do it for this Ohio State-Wisconsin talk. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to have some more college football for you here on the National Hour.
And welcome back to the National Hour. We talked about Ohio State earlier. I'm Jeffrey Hammersley.
I'm Darius Thigpen.
And as I said earlier, Ohio State was the big thing we talked about in the opening segment of the show. This time we're going to talk about some college football in general. Penn State back in the news, but this time for all the right reasons. NCAA moving back on their penalties to the school and their sanctions. 20 scholarships back for the 2014-2015 year. 25 back for 25 in 2016, the 2015-2016 year, and they're going to be back at full strength in 2016-2017. Darius, what does this mean to Penn State, not just the football team, but to the university in general?
Well, I mean, it's going to be a return to normalcy as Penn State's going to get their full strength back in just a few years. It looked like this was going to be something, losing the scholarships that could hold them back for a long time. Now they're going to be back to where they were. And Penn State, from my perspective, I feel like they've weathered the storm really well as a program. In these few years, it's been really trying, but they've done a really good job of putting out a quality team, and this is just going to make it a little easier to get back to being the Penn State that they normally are.
I mean, going back, I remember watching the whole Penn State thing break down on national television. The kids are rioting in the streets. It's almost, you think it's something like a war is breaking out. Kids are in the street, they're rioting, they want Joe Pa and all that stuff.
Right.
Then the sanctions came in, and it was like, oh wow, we already had it bad enough. Now it's compiled even more. Then you bring Bill O'Brien, and you're thinking he's done so well. Why is he still here? Then he says he's going to stay. I think that's the point for Penn State. And I think it all revolves around Bill O'Brien. He had no reason to be at Penn State. He has a lot of ties with it. He has the NFL ties and stuff. He could have stayed with the Patriots. He could have gone. He could have been doing great things in the NFL, but he came to Penn State, and he, as you said earlier, he built onto the program. Last season, I had them winning maybe 4 or 5 games. They surpassed my expectations, and once they hit like the Big Ten season, they were actually a very good team, and they had Ohio State there for almost like a half last season. So even though this team are having all these problems with scholarships, and a couple of their marquee guys like Silas Red left the school, the program is still in good shape. And today, in this whole week actually, it's only going to get better for them.
And I think for me, the real question then becomes, how long until this program is really Penn State again? How long until they're competing for Big Ten titles and national championships? I think it's going to be a while. I think by the time we get to 2016, when they're at full strength as far as scholarships, they'll be good, but I can't see this team playing in a Rose Bowl in the foreseeable future.
When do you think, because I think it's in the neighborhood of maybe 10 years is when this team's got to be back. Do you think it's got to be more 10, less than that? Or could it maybe O'Brien may leave and somebody else comes in and it's like it would be like Tressel taking over for Cooper and it's going to be a whole different mindset.
I don't think it's going to be a championship in the future for Bill O'Brien at Penn State. It'll have to be the next guy, but let's say 10 years right now. 10 years before they're a championship quality team.
I mean, I think that's fair, but Penn State, that's the big story we had there. Now let's roll into the other big games happening this week. Other than Ohio State, Wisconsin, which we know that's the big one. LSU at Georgia. College game day's got to be there. It's a 6 at 9. I mean, this is for Georgia. You go from Clemson, South Carolina. Now it's LSU. Darius, do you see this Georgia team opening up with 2 big wins actually, in the month of September? And this before the really hit the meat of the SEC schedule.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just because this LSU team is not as experienced as an LSU team would normally be, they have the talent there. But you look at Georgia's roster, they've got guys like Todd Gurley. They've got guys who have played in these big games. Obviously, Aaron Murray, who was literally 1 yard away from taking out mighty Bama in the SEC championship game last year. These guys have been there, done that. And obviously, I mean, it was huge losing to Clemson, but out of conference, that was the one loss. In conference, they're still in control of their own destinies.
Absolutely. For Georgia, that Clemson loss. I thought I had Murray. He was going in as my Heisman favorite. Georgia as a national title favorite. They lose that game. They slip in the standings. Now, if they win this game, are they a legit? Do you have them still in the national championship picture? I know they're 9 right now, but do you think if they win out, could this a one-loss team get in over like an undefeated Ohio State team and an Oregon team?
Well, I mean, because here's the thing: they would have to beat either LSU or Alabama a second time. Well, it would be a second time if it was LSU. But they would have to beat one of those two teams in the SEC championship game. And I do think that would be enough. I mean, having South Carolina, LSU, and then another probably top 5 SEC team, that's 3 top 10 wins. That's a solid schedule and a solid way of weathering that schedule.
I agree there. Prediction. You got LSU, you got Georgia. Games that ain't got to be in between the hedges.
Yeah, I'm taking the Bulldogs in this one. I think they're going to win big, 34-20.
LSU, this team, they were gutted by the NFL and the recruits and stuff. I think Georgia, they still have a lot more to the table with Gurley, as you said, and Aaron Murray. So I got Georgia. Close game, maybe less than 4 or 5 points, but I think Georgia, they're going to weather this storm and they're going to move on for a shot at maybe the SEC title. Another game with SEC implications. Number 21 Ole Miss travels to Tuscaloosa to take on number 1 Alabama. The question should be, how badly will Alabama win this game? Because if they slip up, I can't see them slipping up to Ole Miss.
I don't see it. I mean, Bama had their struggles with Virginia Tech, but obviously this is a Bama team that is taking a little bit of time coming into their own. They played really well in the A&M game for the first 3 quarters and then slipped away in the fourth quarter. But I do think this Alabama team, they're a championship caliber team. They know how to win. They have guys who are winners, 2-time, even 3-time national champions on their team. So they know what it takes to win. Ole Miss just hasn't been there yet. They have the talent. They've got the high-end recruits that'll be there eventually, but it's not Ole Miss's time yet.
Yeah, I think Alabama easily by 30 points. You think it's going to be more than that or less than that?
I say less than that. 30 is a lot, but I would say about 15 to 20.
Okay. Next game, they played last year in Norman. This time it's Oklahoma, number 14 at number 22, Notre Dame. Reese playing lackluster. This is not the Notre Dame team from last season. Who do you got?
Oh, this is Blake Bell's day. I mean, he showed that he is a big, imposing guy at the quarterback position, kind of like Colin Klein was at Kansas State last year. That's what they're expecting him to be at Oklahoma. So I think Oklahoma is just going to be able to impose their will, and Bell is going to go all through that Notre Dame defense, which is not nearly as good as what they were last year.
Yeah, this Notre Dame team, not the same as last year. I got Oklahoma. 10 points seems pretty fair on the road. It's going to be very interesting. Last game regarding to picks here, California at number 2, Oregon. Explosive offenses, Jared Goff for California. Who do you got here? Do you have the upset alert possibly happening in Eugene?
Oh, I would put Cal up there for an upset special, but I'm not picking Cal. I would say Oregon really needs to watch their back because this Cal team has the explosiveness. We have seen them up close, and their receivers are phenomenal. The freshman sensation Goff He's still one of the best passers in the country. You have to watch out for him. But I do think Oregon's going to be able to win the game. It just comes down to how much can Oregon score and how well will their defense play in this game.
You're right. I'm going to say it's going to be decent size, but I think Oregon by probably 3 touchdowns. That seems pretty fair. That's all the time we have for college football here in the National Hour. We'll take a short break and we'll come back with some NFL action and some final stories down the line. I'm Jeffrey Hammersley, alongside me Darius Thigpen. This is the National Hour.